Hey guys, Comic Boom here to share with you guys a Star Wars review of classic Marvel Star Wars issues 1 to 6. And I'm sharing an old review an old collaboration that I was fortunate enough to do with Professor Bill at Comic Book University and DarknightNation. And at one time we had a temporary collaboration. We experimented with we called ourselves Heroes Collide, and it was a temporary collaboration. It didn't end up. It wasn't something that we kept up for a long period of time. But before we stopped, we actually had quite a bit of. We had a lot of fun, and we had a number of reviews under our belt. Unfortunately, our timetables and a slew of other different reasons, it never quite worked out the collaboration. But in any event, we did have a Star Wars review of the first 6 issues of the classic Marvel Star Wars issues, that 1 to 6, that we really enjoyed talking about. And it was Obi Prof Belobi Darth Knight Nation, and of course I was Grand Admiral Boom. Who else would I be? So in any event, I thought I'd share this video review with you. I think it's fun. You get the insights of all three of us in terms of the review itself, in terms of Star Wars, those first 6 issues, and it's kind of fun. And I do have permission of Professor Bill and Dark Knight from to share this with you guys. It was originally shared as a podcast, which I believe has since been taken down. But in any event, I thought I'd share it with you guys. So check it out.
Hey guys, Heroes Collide podcast. We're here. What's up? It's me, Professor Bill. It's Dark Knight Nation. These names are really weird, Boom. Like you got some crazy names here, but we got Comic Boom here also. The three of us. We're going to talk some Star Wars, specifically Star Wars in the Marvel comics. What do you think, guys?
Great topic.
It's
great topic.
It's an interesting one for sure. I'd never prior to this read the original Marvel Star Wars adaptation, and without getting too far into it, it was something. Something.
Oh, so you did get the chance to. I know Boom read it, so you did get a chance to read those first 6 issues.
I did. It was an experience. I'll tell you that.
Excellent. So these first 6 issues, guys, this is a comic book that the publication date is what was it? July. It was July 1977. There we go. But there was the 6 issues, and those represented A New Hope. So when the movie was coming out, this was the big deal, and this was a part of a guerrilla marketing tactic that Gorge Lucas was trying to use. If you guys ever seen the Toys That Made Us, you remember the one episode with the Star Wars? Like they practically gave that away for free. You know something they did give away for free? The license for this book. Marvel was not charged at all. Now, I don't know how much they originally tried to charge, because they came to Stan Lee and said, "Hey, Stan, we'd really like to get this book, and we'd like you to publish the series." And Stan was like, "Yeah, no, we're going to stick with our in-house licensed product, our in-house product, not some licensed products. We're going to stick with our creator-owned product that, ours is Spider-Man, X-Men, stuff like that." And Lucas was a little bit sad by hearing that, but, it's cool. The thing is, he heard of this guy, Roy Thomas, who was doing the Conan comic book much later on, a couple of years from this particular date, 5 to be specific. The Conan the Barbarian movie would be made because of the success of his Conan the Barbarian comic book. And Gorge Lucas saw that, including a bunch of other people also, and they're like, "This guy is amazing. How about if you were to do a Star Wars comic book for us?" He's like, "What's Star Wars? I'm kind of into sci-fi." And Lucas made sure to say, "This is not sci-fi, it's space fantasy." Okay, sure. So your sci-fi space fantasy stuff. Sure. And they actually knew each other. What the funny thing is, he actually met Gorge Lucas before. Lucas came to his house. He wanted to see the Scrooge McDuck mantle over top of his fireplace and whatnot in his room. After American Graffiti, they used to hang out a little bit. it was a time when you can actually hang out with the famous people, right? If you were at least a little bit famous yourself. But Lucas was always into the comic books. He definitely knew about the Kirby Crackle, and all that good stuff, and he knew about Roy Thomas's work. So he came to Roy Thomas, and a couple other guys came to Roy Thomas and said, "Hey, listen, Stanley said no, but do you think you can convince him to say yes?" He's like, "Well, I don't know. How much are you charging?" He's like, "Listen, we'll give it to you for free." It's like, "Are you serious? You'll give us the license for free?" He's like, "Yeah." So Roy Thomas didn't know this stuff, but talking to Jim Shooter and talking to several other people as well, and most of the stuff is in the Alter Ego comic book, or not comic book, the Alter Ego magazine that is still to this day published, and it's by Roy Thomas. And I want to thank Comic Boom for turning me on to that. He points out that Marvel was actually really going down the tubes at the moment. Half of the comic books, just Spider-Man alone, that were being sold, mind you, this was before the direct market, the local comic book stores thing happened. It was still the newsstand prices and everything for everything. Half of those comic books would actually come back unsold, and they would have to give refunds to those grocery stores. And that's of Spider-Man. How much of the other books? Um, Geez, the Avengers wasn't selling, Fantastic Four wasn't selling, nothing was selling for the most part. So Roy Thomas was able to convince Stan Lee, "Hey, listen, this is for free. Let's go. Let's knock this out the park." And he's like, "Okay, fine, let's do it." And there was only one caveat that George Lucas wanted. Marvel could do whatever they wanted, just one caveat, and that was you have to release the book, the first two issues, before the movie comes out. So, for speculators and anybody else, that means that the first appearance of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and all of these characters was actually in the comic books, not in the movies.
That's right.
Because even though the publication date was July 1977, the release date, the on sale date, was in March. And there's Roy Thomas and Howard Chaykin. 107 issues plus 3 annuals. The movie came out May 25th, 1977. Let's go over to Boom first. What do you think about this insanity?
Uh, Star Wars is just fantastic, and adding to your story there, I just read the Wikipedia entry as well, and I was stunned to discover that Lucasfilm got no royalties out of Star Wars unless it sold over
Yeah.
100,000 copies. Marvel Stan Lee negotiated a sweet deal. They probably never thought it would sell over 100,000 copies because they were in dire financial straits at the time, according, like you said, to Jim
Yes.
Shooter, and well, boy, oh boy, did that shatter expectations. It's another example of how much faith and confidence that George Lucas had in his product, in his movies, and in the toys. He also had a sweet deal with the toys with 20th Century Fox. Their biggest mistake
Yes.
they ever made is that they never got the toy licensing rights. Star Wars revolutionized movies being affiliated with toys and keeping their licensing for their toys. But Star Wars is it's funny because as a comic book, one of the things that stands out for me, and I know Dark Knight will have a lot to comment on this. That they Howard Chaykin, Roy Thomas did the writing and Howard Chaykin did the art, at least initially. And the art, and I say this with great respect to Howard Chaykin because he became a much better artist when he went on to American Flag, and in the 80s he grew into a better artist. This was really at the beginning, as earlier in his career, but the art wasn't that good in Star Wars. And I got to tell you, in the first few issues, it wasn't that great at all. But by the time you hit the sixth issue, by then the popularity at Star Wars of the comic book had really taken off. The movie had already been released, and by the time you hit that sixth issue, Howard Chaykin actually had embellishers with him on the title, and the art improved dramatically, as I'm showing here on the screen. And those who are listening by podcast can't see this, but let's just say that when Howard Chaykin, he got some help by artist Rick Hoberg and Bill Ray were embellishers on his art, and boy, did it make a difference. That sixth issue of Star Wars really was the best issue of that series artistically. And there's a couple of things in the story that I guess maybe I can allude to later, but I don't know. Did you guys catch how they drew Jabba the Hutt in the first issue? Did you catch
Yeah.
that? I had
An
no
alien.
idea. I mean, I forgot that this Jabba the Hutt was. I don't know. He's a strange looking alien person, and right beside your picture here on the screen and below you, Dark Knight, is what Jabba Hutt looked like when he was talking to Han Solo. He looked like a
Yep.
well, he was a quadruped anywhere, not a quadruped, but he was humanoid. Definitely not the
Yeah.
fat blob that we know him to be. And
Yeah, he was
it's
bipedal, yellow skin.
yeah, and what's interesting, he's even different. He looks even different than how he was originally portrayed in a movie by a human actor as well. And
Yeah.
there's a number of things in that first few comic books and the first few issues that stand out a little bit that add to the Star Wars lore. In particular, the first reference to the Force is they reference it as the cosmic Force as opposed to the
Yep.
Force, and just it was very interesting. So overall, it's wonderful to see this see the beginnings of this franchise, and knowing what we know now, how this grew into something so extraordinary. It really does. It's hard not to put a smile on your face and look back with a sense of nostalgia.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to get into a little bit about that art because I'm not going to lie, it was a bit of a slog the first 5 issues getting through that Howard Chaykin art until issue 6. And I mean, boy, what a massive improvement, like you said. I mean, between 5 and 6, it really goes to tell you, first of all, just like putting this out there, how important inkers are in the comic book industry because they can entirely make or break a penciler's art. And it's very clear that when you get the right inker on the job, man, it makes a world of a difference. There's also just like artistically issues with perspective and camera and stuff that I wasn't a fan of. But it was interesting, certainly getting into this and seeing perspectives or aspects of A New Hope that were more implied in the film. You know what I mean? Like getting more into depth about Luke's relationship. I think with what was it, Biggs? Was that his name, Biggs?
Yeah,
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 Biggs Dark Lighter.
Biggs, and because I remember as a kid hearing about that or hearing references to that, but never actually seeing it. So having that opportunity and taking advantage of the medium to give you that sort of moment and give you a sort of understanding as to why Luke's development as a character is so important and how it very much embodies very central aspects of the hero's journey. I mean, Star Wars is let's say one of the most quintessential examples of the hero's journey done right. So it was nice to kind of get those little added touches and added experiences through the comic book. Although, obviously, the story portrayed in the comic book is not without its flaws.
No doubt. So they did introduce Biggs Darklighter there, Cammy and Fixer. The Cammy and Fixer are two characters who simply weren't in the movie at all. It's funny because I'm sure that Boom will remember, as I do, that the original release when it was just Star Wars, there was no Episode 4, A New Hope, or any of that nonsense. It was just Star Wars. That was it. There was zero reference to Biggs. I think there might have been the one part where um, Biggs' ship blew up and no, yeah, nobody even yelled Biggs. No, there was no Biggs. You know what I'm saying? And it was in many, many re-releases later where they kept adding new things and whatnot. It's a funny thing. But okay, timer,
yeah,
put the timer up.
yeah.
Stop. That's really distracting. Wow.
You're yelling at
um,
me when lens flares were just firing off all over the place. Jeez,
what was firing off?
the lens flares, all those transitions. I mean, I thought
Oh, I
I
know,
thought we were
right?
in a Michael Bay movie.
I almost had a freaking seizure. Um,
Yeah.
what do you call it? Um, no, he. I don't think he could see because the glasses.
Oh yeah. I kept putting up a. At
You
first, it's
kept on
funny
putting
because
the
I like.
thing, and like I had to
Yeah.
lean forward to see it, and that's why I'm just like, dude, he. I don't think he could see it.
Well, because I was confused because when I put like one hand up, it's like inverse. So I was like, okay, so then do I have to write it backwards for it to appear properly in the screen? And yeah, okay, it was a process. This is one for the bloopers reel for sure.
No worries. It's up there now. It should be in
All
there
right.
soon. I started at
All
40
right.
minutes.
Okay. So anyway, this I don't even remember where I was. Um,
Biggs. You're talking about Biggs.
yeah. Oh yeah. So aside from Biggs and things like that, like this book, it for the most part only got to the chance to use concept art for what everything looks like. So some people have said, "Oh, they got to see stills from the footage reels," and Roy Thomas has already declared that's not true. They didn't get the chance to see anything like that. There was no such thing. At the moment, they weren't able to see things like that. It was literally only concept art. So, I, like, I understand the idea that maybe Shaken wasn't as great as you want him to be. It's fine, whatever it is, what it is. I personally thought it was fine for back in the day. I was reading this maybe months after it had come out. After I saw that movie, I'm like, dude, there's a comic book. I need to see the comic book. But all of that stuff was drawn off of just concept art alone. And the book was done on there were several scripts that were put out. You could tell there were some parts in here that didn't make the movie. Obviously, there were some parts in here that were actually changed from the movie. Yeah, but you got to see all the behind the scenes stuff way in advance. That's how come when they did start making references to Biggs Darklighter, we did say, "Hey, how come Jabba looks like that in Return of the Jedi? How come all these different we noticed these things because we did see the comic books." By the way, this comic book did actually continue with issue 7 immediately. It was actually pointed out at the end of issue 6 that the comic book was going to continue. George Lucas said there were two things that you cannot touch on in the comic book. One is the relationship between Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, and it's a good thing because there was a kiss in there in this book. Remember where she kissed him full on the lips and
Got you
whatnot? It's like
too.
that yeah, but like the one, it was like it was a big one. It's like, dude, that didn't happen in the movie. That did not happen
Mm.
in the movie. So like, there was just the one in the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. So this was a little bit weird. But what do you call it? Yeah, there were lots of scenes like that. Anyway, so that relationship and crap, there was something else, and I can't remember what it was. But anyway, so the only thing that they were really allowed to do was to, at first, just talk about um, Han Solo, which I thought was interesting because this actually led to the first embargo that George Lucas would ever do. Just for the sake of conversation, issue 8 introduces this Green Rabbit character called Jackson, and there's a whole bunch of people who are laughing their ass off right now about Jackson. Jack's the rabbit, the green rabbit, the 7 foot tall green rabbit. Lucas saw that and he's like, no, that character has to go. And that will never make the light of day for any movie, anything that we do afterwards.
And then he gives
And
us
mind
Jar
you,
Jar Binks. We get Jar Jar Binks, and he gets rid of the
yeah, we
rat.
got Jar Jar Binks instead. But it's so
Hey,
funny because if you think about it, with Alan Dean Foster, he was told to pen Splinter of the Mind's Eye because just in case somehow, with all the marketing and everything, if this movie wasn't a success, Splinter of the Mind's Eye was supposed to be a very low budget sequel to this.
Yeah.
But it didn't need to be the case. And that's what's so impressive about this. But with everything that's here, we got to see Anchorhead. So we got to see a bunch of the behind the scenes. We got to see the full name of the gaffy stick, the Gandalafi, whatever the hell it was. I actually have it over here. The Gadurfi, which is like, dude, what is some of this crazy stuff here? But that's what this was. 1976 was not the first San Diego Comic Con. You know what was a first for that particular San Diego Comic Con, though? The first time that they tried to push a movie in San Diego Comic Con. So the first movie panel was held there, and it had Thomas and Shaken and the marketing director Charles Lippincott, who did most of the work with Thomas in order to get this comic book pushed.
Uh,
Guys, what do you think about some of the stuff that happened in the comic book as a whole, besides the art and whatnot? What do you think about the story as a whole and where it actually broke? Because mind you, the first two issues dropped before the movie did. So before we actually got to see the Death Star, right when the Millennium Falcon escaped through the blockade on Mos Eisley.
well, I
mm,
just want to say for the record that the first issue confirms that Han Solo shot first. He
And
shot
only
first. It's in the comic.
And only. That's right. Greedo did not even get a shot off. Damn
Exactly.
it.
Not even a shut off in the comic. I mean, and you have to know because you know Roy Thomas himself had said it that they were just going off the script and it's amazing how remarkably a good job they did even with Howard Chaykin's arguably less than stellar art. This comic book truly did feel like a Star Wars comic book despite the art, and it's quite clear that Han Solo shot first, so that must have been clear in the script, on the written page. Han Solo even flipped a coin to the bartender after he'd done it, and I think he said, keep the change or something. I mean, this was
For the
obviously,
damages.
and by the way,
He-
there's one other scene I want to throw in there. Princess Leia is a killer too, because in the first issue, the stormtrooper shooting. The stormtrooper says, "Set your phasers on, or set your guns on stun," and she says, "Mine's on kill," and she shoots back.
Yes.
So these are killers. I mean, the princess is a killer. Han Solo is a killer. I mean, all this new age mumbo jumbo nonsense. No, these are hard ass rebels, and they are portrayed as such in this first issue alone.
Yeah, because in the movie, they say, stun her, set to stun, whatever. She doesn't respond back. She just, fires back and tries to get
True.
out of there. In the comic book, though,
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, really? Mine's set to kill." Blip, blip, blip.
Yeah. And the stormtrooper, they don't shoot, they just subdue her, they paralyze her. They don't, the stormtroopers exercise more compassion than she does.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Of course, they're under orders to get her alive, but still, it was kind of a
She was a
telling moment.
badass.
Dude,
What are
so
some of the
that's the
things
thing
you
about
found, Trev?
I was just say the thing that I love is that like Han Solo's coolness just kind of permeates everything that he's in because in this when he shoots Greedo and tips off the barkeep, he doesn't even say keep the change. He just sorry for the mess. That's it. He just coolly flips the coin away and says sorry for the mess. I mean, the thing about this is that this is an interesting sort of primer for Star Wars. And although I like I said, I mean, I definitely do have my problems with it. It does make me want to watch A New Hope. Like, and that's its primary job is to make me feel Star Wars. And especially obviously as somebody who's seen A New Hope multiple times, reading this makes me think of A New Hope and how good A New Hope actually is. And for better or for worse, makes me or makes me think about how much better the actual movie is than the book because there are just things that come out of George Lucas's mind on the film screen that materialize in a way that obviously the comic can't. And it's directly his. And that's something that really keeps that sort of Star Wars flame burning in me. But I will say, to at least at some point compliment the art. The end of the second issue where you have like that splash image of the Millennium Falcon flying out into space and this kind of palette of colors is actually pretty stunning. It's actually a really great composition, and I can imagine that if I were, an adolescent or a kid reading this before Star Wars came out, man, that would have sold me on the movie right then and there. So, just giving credit where credit is due, there's a lot of great things that I think do show Star Wars, perhaps in a little bit of a crude light, but still definitely are exemplary of what Star Wars is, what it's trying to do, and why it's so freaking cool.
Yeah. Hey, what is the actual original color of the lightsabers?
Uh,
Oh, good catch, man. I never even thought of that.
They're all pink.
That's it. And
Plus,
they look ragged too. They don't look smooth. They don't have their traditional, lightsaber look to them. They look a little bit rough.
well, yeah, again, it was all based on concept art. They couldn't see After Effects or anything like that. That wasn't presented to them. In fact, look at the original Star Wars release. They were white. Both of them were
mm,
white. Like, wow, that's really weak. And the original idea was that those long stick things hanging from the belts of the stormtroopers was that everybody had a laser sword. So
Oh,
it wasn't yeah, it wasn't
I
until towards
didn't
the
know that.
very end where um where the script was being finalized, and but the costumes were already made, that Lucas said, you know what, let's leave that specifically to the Jedi.
You know,
That's
it's
yeah.
funny that you mentioned that about the lightsabers, Professor, because if you look at issue 1 of Star Wars, it's that iconic image of Luke Skywalker holding the lightsaber, and it's actually an accurate depiction of what we now know a lightsaber to look like. Yet in the pages itself, in those first in those first 6 issues, the lightsaber, it has much more of a ragged edge to it. In fact, it almost has more of a Kylo Ren type of raggedy edge. It's not very fine, and it's funny how these things come full circle in a sense. But I
Yeah.
I find it curious that the lightsaber looks very different on the cover of issue 1 than it actually does when it's ultimately utilized by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader. I believe they have their battle in issue 4 or 5. But
Mhm.
speaking of which, I want to mention a couple other things. Boy, oh
Hold on,
boy,
before
this.
we go on, I want to
Okay.
point out one thing. I want to see if you thought this the same thing. When you originally saw the movie, did you think there was only one lightsaber
Uh,
besides like Darth Vader's? When I was a kid, I thought that he was like, "Oh, here's your father's lightsaber," but then he must have used it to go against Darth Vader, which means that it would have been lost. It would have been back to, or I just looked at it as that there weren't two lightsabers. They were both blue. You know what I'm saying? They both looked very similar to each other. I didn't realize that they were actually two lightsabers until later on. You have to figure it out. Oh, because he has his blue lightsaber, Luke has the blue one again. It's like, oh, how would he have gotten that? I guess there must have been two.
I
This movie or this book very specifically pointed out Obi-Wan pulls out his own lightsaber, and it's like, oh, okay,
eliminates the
yeah,
confusion. Yeah, I
yeah.
never I
I
never had that
I
conundrum
didn't
when I was
catch that
younger.
when I was a kid.
Oh no, it's good. It's a conundrum. Um,
So what else did you want to point
well,
out?
I just wanted to point out just how atrocious Chewbacca looked.
Yeah.
Chewbacca, drawn by Howard Chaykin, he looked more like a gorilla. It's like they couldn't quite figure out how to draw Chewbacca. Some early images of Luke Skywalker and C3PO's eyes are much bigger. He looks,
Mhm.
he looks really awful. Darth Vader also was clearly a work in progress if you look at that first issue. And again, Howard Chaykin had this way it seemed in every issue up until issue 6 when the art dramatically improved because he got those embellishers, that there were scenes where there were headshot scenes of Obi-Wan that would end on a page, then another page would have a beautiful a full facial shot of Luke Skywalker screaming Ben, of Princess Leia expressing surprise, of Han Solo looking on, and and so Howard Chaykin had his moments during those first few issues. Those first 5 issues, you could see where those issues where he had maybe a little bit of extra time on a page or something. You could really see how this was something that was genuinely new. And in any event, it's really quite enjoyable. I absolutely love going through this to see, and I have an appreciation, and this isn't an insult to Howard Chaykin. I mean, imagine having no concept of Star Wars at all, and you're just given this script, and you're told to draw a guy named Chewbacca. He kind of looks like a gorilla. He kind of doesn't. Just go with it. Here's C3PO, and then go off a description and draw it. I mean, when you think of, before I criticize Howard Chaykin too broadly, we have to keep in mind that, what he did was still quite remarkable and quite impressive, given the limitations at the time.
Yeah, they did describe Chewbacca as monkey-faced. So, and it actually comes out in the comic book. They say the monkey-faced, Chewbacca, the Wookiee, and blah 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 blah.
No, it's man. Yeah,
You know, you can sort of see the progression of Howard Chaykin's art throughout like the series of the covers. I mean, there are, obviously the most dramatic change is between 5 and 6, but you can see, for example, between Darth Vader's feature on issue 1 and his feature on issue 4, there's a pretty dramatic cleanup in his aesthetic and his design, which I can definitely appreciate. I mean, you know, for all of the smack I've talked about Chaykin's art in this series, I actually do like the cover to issue 4. I think it's eye-popping. I very much think that the composition identifies a lot of what that issue and that part of the story has to represent. I mean, it's a pretty well done cover by comparison. Um, I mean, and this is going to be, I guess, for you guys because I wasn't even a thought when these books were coming out. But obviously, like covers are used as comic book marketing material first and foremost. Was there a point where before seeing the movie, you looked at any of these covers and said, "Oh, this is great"? Did the covers actually do their job in regards to catching your attention?
100%. Yeah. Plus, I do want to point out really quick that you remember the first two comic books came out before the movie was released, so they didn't get to see anything. You're talking about issue 4 and 5 being dramatically improved. Shaken would have already been working on issue 3 and 4 before the movie came out, also. So once the movie
Right.
came out, you could say, "Oh, so that's what these guys look like." Then
Hmm.
those things can be tightened up. That's just the way I look at it. But you talk about covers. Did you by chance notice something special about cover 2? What's it called? What's issue 2? What does it say on issue 2? What's the catchphrase?
Um, I can literally
Lu-
pull it up as we speak.
Luke Skywalker strikes back.
Ah,
I wonder if Lucas got the idea for part 2 off of that, the title, The Empire Strikes Back. I don't know for
It,
sure. I'm literally guessing. I'm swinging on this one, but I don't know. Guys,
I,
what else about this comic book really catches your attention? For me, I think that there was more emotion in here. There was a more complete story. I think that this was literally like reading the book. I remember reading the book actually when I was a lot younger. Also, I think it might have been one of the earlier novels that I read because I was so infatuated by this universe. I remember reading so many things that just weren't in the movie and this actually wound up making it so that now I'm going to read every novel, of a movie that I want to see. I'm going to read this first and see all the things that I'm missing. And that's been the case until Iron Man 2. After Iron Man 2, they stopped putting them out beforehand, which is a damn shame, but is
I
what it is.
I personally I never did get the Star Wars. I was collecting comic books at the time. I had just started collecting comics in around 1976. So I never started collecting Star Wars. What I got the great giant size Star Wars and the Empire Strikes Back. I got the oversized those treasury edition for Star Wars. I still have them. They're in storage. I wish I could have shown them today. In any event, they're reading copies. I've read them. They're pretty much destroyed. They're together by the staples are barely holding the pages together. But I love them. But I should love them more because, admittedly, as I said they're in storage. But like I said, how could you not love Star Wars? Straight up, when Star Wars came out, I was probably more into the action figures than I was the comic books per se, and because I just started getting into the Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, et cetera, and I was
Darth Vader case or C3PO case?
oh yeah, you know, it didn't matter. I didn't draw those distinctions. Anything Star Wars in the toy shop back then, it wasn't like today where you consider, I actually got the full. I remember my mom and dad bought me Luke Skywalker and my sister Princess Leia. My sister's 2 years younger than me, and we would play Star Wars together. And Luke's we would reenact that scene where Luke Skywalker grabbed Princess Leia and she kisses him, and they swung across the dot, and the stormtroopers are shooting at him and stuff. It was awesome. That and my Incredible Hulk doll. It was I incorporated Incredible Hulk was always part of my Star Wars fantasy, but it was. Anyways, who knew that one day Marvel would be part of Star Wars, or would buy Star Wars, or whatever. Anyways,
All right.
it it was I mean such great memories, and I got to tell you to be able to relive them again with this continuing series of podcasts that we're doing, and it's a lot of fun, and it just puts a smile on my face when I look back and look how far we've come, and you look at the evolution of these characters that we know and love, where they started from, and they didn't look particularly attractive, all of them, but my how far they've come.
Hmm. And you know what I'm noticing too, just looking out at all these covers, they were very good in terms of designing these things to let you know what this is about. And I mean this on the most basic level. The Star Wars logo is big, bold, and takes up a third of the whole cover. I mean, this really does kind of circle back to that conversation that George Lucas said, okay, this is going to be our cheap marketing material for the movie before it comes out. People need to know the name Star Wars. We are literally going to plaster this big, bold font over the entire top third of the page, and you're going to know what Star Wars is, or you're going to at least remember the name Star Wars, whether or not you read the book, which is really interesting. And on the topic of exposure, this has been really interesting for me because I can promise you right now that there was never a way in hell that I would have gone back and read these books if not for the podcast. And it's provided me a really interesting experience because, I mean, I was born in 97. I grew up with the prequels. You know what I mean? Uh,
Hmm.
My
you know,
apologies.
yeah, well, you know, at the time, I liked them. And also, I also vehemently defend Jar Jar Binks because I grew up with Jar Jar. So leave my pal alone, okay?
That explains a
Um,
Wow.
lot.
yeah, yeah, I said it. Um,
Sorry about that. I couldn't resist.
but
Yeah, you're
to me,
Anakining him. You're burning him.
eh,
Oh, he'll give it
it's
back. He
okay.
gives it back worse than he gets it. I tell you that.
Yes, he does.
I'll accept this. I'll accept it this one time. Um, but the fact of the matter is, this has all been very interesting to me because just the way I was grew up in the middle of the prequels, like Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan is as much my Obi-Wan, if not more so than
Alex McGinnis.
Alec
Alex.
Guinness. I don't know why the hell I said Alec Baldwin. Jesus.
Sorry.
But point being is that this has been really cool for me to go back and see what the first ever Star Wars thing was to be let loose and out into the ether and to kind of see or at least try to extrapolate what the impression of Star Wars might have been before that movie came out, right? Because by the time I was old enough to recognize what was happening, Star Wars was a cultural juggernaut worldwide. And I think one can make the argument that Star Wars was probably the first global pop cultural juggernaut ever. And to see what it was in its early days is really, really interesting. And just to get a sense of how it's evolved over time as well.
I just want to. Sorry, Professor. I just
Good.
want to interject one thing because I'm compelled to say this. I noticed this. It stood out. I can't believe I haven't mentioned it thus far. I was surprised by the use of thought balloons in this series. You don't see that in anymore.
Yeah.
Thought balloons really started to go the way of the dodo bird with Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. Nowadays, writers they think it's a bad thing if you lose thought balloons because the art's supposed to convey the thoughts and the actions. But there are many scenes in this opening 6 issue series where you don't get to hear what they're thinking in the movie. But there are scenes in here where you see what Han Solo is thinking, what Luke Skywalker's thinking when he's in the X-wing. He's thinking about Ben Kenobi. He calls him Ben Kenobi. He doesn't call him Ben. The movie, it's more personal. He just calls him Ben, but in the comic book, he always refers to him as Ben Kenobi. But it's interesting. But the use of thought balloons in this comic, you can tell that there's Marvel is just as a medium. Comic books are still in that transition stage from moving out away from thought balloons.
Mhm. To be honest, I actually kind of miss thought balloons. Just call me old fashioned. I'm cool with it. So there were two print runs in the same year for these issues, and it sold more than 4 times what Spider-Man sold during the time that these issues were out.
What were the
Four
numbers,
Mm.
times.
Professor? Do you know? Do you know the numbers by chance?
I do not know what the numbers are, but I do know that the money they made was in excess of $1 million, and they got to keep all of it because no licensing fee.
And with regarding the numbers, I would be really interested to get an idea of what that surge in sales looked like between issues 2 and 3. I mean, it has to have been gargantuan. You go from a property that is at the time seemingly unknown being marketed for film, and then the film comes out and is an absolute juggernaut. You know, I imagine, issues 3 and 4, the jump in sales numbers between that and the prior two must have been massive.
And
Yeah.
Lucasfilm had the advantage. Lucasfilm, at least once they exceeded 100,000 sales on a monthly basis, Lucasfilm had the right to renegotiate to go back, and that's exactly what they did. So
Yeah.
Lucasfilm, I mean, George Lucas, he did it right. He knew how to create incentives for people to take a chance on Star Wars, and he, in fact, this is one of those rare points. It's surprising that, leave it to Stan Lee to get a little bit more money out of George Lucas, because he certainly was more successful than 20th Century Fox was in regard to their toys.
Yeah, this is true. Again, Lee said no originally. He didn't want to do the licensing. This, however, did change things. And I do believe it was only the first issue that got the second printing. The other ones were just the regular run because they were still um, in in circulation. But the licensing became such a big deal all of a sudden that they started taking more license at Marvel. Indiana Jones, another Lucasfilm project, Dune, which arguably is a much more beloved sci-fi book than Star Wars, and a lot of those ideas came from Frank Herbert's Dune. The Transformers, which we know is a juggernaut today, GI Joe, which they're trying, Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, Battlestar Galactica. All of these were huge sellers for Marvel, and DC tried to jump on the bandwagon also. The I think one of the biggest license that they had was actually Star Trek, and it didn't sell anywhere near what the licenses here did. It's kind of like, if you wind up becoming this really awesome cook and everybody starts coming to you saying, cook my meal, cook my meal, cook my meal. You don't really want to go to the next guy. It's like sloppy seconds to get the other guy to say do your stuff. But this was extremely successful, and it genuinely is one of those things that, looking back, a lot of people have pointed out Star Wars and this deal wind up saving Marvel from what was probably going to be a bankruptcy. It was huge. As far as the numbers, I think 298,000 were the number of sales that Spider-Man was doing at the time. So if you multiply that by 4 plus a little, that's the numbers that's the number of books that Star Wars is actually putting out. Like I said, they needed to make it go to second print. So remember, there are two editions that came out in the same year for Star Wars. So just because it says 1977 doesn't mean you necessarily have a first print. Anyway, let's wrap things up with final thoughts, guys.
Can I actually ask a brief question of the two of you? I'm curious. Well, a second question. So, excluding the fact that Roy Thomas was obviously instrumental in bringing the Star Wars property to Marvel, if you could draft a writer and an artist of the time to have done this book instead of Roy Thomas, who would you pick? Because a writer doesn't automatically come to mind, but I look at this and I do 100% have an artist in mind. And I think Jim Aparo would have knocked this out of the park. He is the only name that came to mind as soon as I started tinkering around with this question. But I'm really curious what you guys would think.
Artist, it's a really good question. Like writer, no, I don't want to even imagine a different writer on this. I think there's going to be a lot of podcasts that we do going forward where we're talking about something that Roy Thomas has done, that Roy Thomas has brought to life. And I think that more and more, if you guys aren't already, you're going to come to the realization and there's a man who's still alive today, that he's brought so much. One of the main reasons why comics are what they are is Roy Thomas. In fact, 2 years after this first issue came out, he actually wound up accepting the job as editor-in-chief. Archie Goodwin was actually the editor-in-chief at the time that this was put out. And I'm telling you, man, I can't imagine anybody else doing the writing for this. And neither could George Lucas. As far as artists, yeah, Aparo doing that. He was at DC at the time, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is kind of just a fantasy pick, but
my fantasy
for
pick,
me, I guess maybe Gene Colan. I'd love to see what he would do and the motions that he would put together with it.
I would. I just. I actually think Neil Adams would nail this. I realized at the time he was probably with DC, but I think Neil Adams, man, I think he would have done a stellar job. That would have been my first pick.
Yeah.
I also just want to make the note that it was in you guys are going to correct me, but Jack Kirby had just left Marvel in 1972 or three, didn't he, or something? Or when did he?
Yeah.
1970,
What's that?
No.
70,
Yeah,
even
1970.
70.
So he was Jack Kirby was at DC at the time of this, but imagine Jack Kirby's sort of dynamic, bombastic art drawing Star Wars. It would have looked. I know it's hard to imagine because
Too
it's so
different.
blocky, but it. One has to wonder if Jack Kirby was still at Marvel, if he would have been the one drawing this, how different the aesthetic would have been. It makes you it makes you think. But I would go with Neil Adams. I would go with Neil Adams.
No, he returned. Jack returned to Marvel in the spring of 1975.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he
Okay,
was back. I
he
had a
was
feeling he
back.
was. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because he was doing. He finished Mad Bomb from Captain Marvel or Captain America. He does a bunch of things. Yeah, but like even later on, like when you actually look at like the toys that made us about the Transformers and GI Joe and whatnot,
Yeah.
Larry Hama, Bob Budiansky, these guys they didn't really want to have anything to do with the. They were the only ones who actually accepted doing the licensed projects.
Okay.
They weren't considered the glorious ones. So
Okay.
yeah, no, I can't see Jack Kirby even considering taking Star Wars.
Well, I just gotta wonder because, and again, we all love Howard Chaykin now, or at least I do. He's got a special place in my heart for other reasons because it was fight against
Mm,
censorship, and I love the way he stands up for himself, even if I don't always agree with everything he says. I love how he
yeah,
says it, man. Howard
how's
Chaykin,
yeah.
I show him a lot of respect, and in any event, I do think it shows Marvel's attitude toward this. They didn't think that this was going to sell, obviously, because if they did, I don't think they would have put Howard Chaykin on this. And maybe that, I don't know. I don't. Do you guys, if you agree with me on that or not? But I just find that, compared to other artists at the time, this was not. This wasn't. I would say this is C-level art at the time. If you look at this, wasn't A-level. He was not an A-level Marvel artist at the time, and so
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
uh, and the improvement by the time you hit that sixth issue, we all know how long it takes for comic books to get out. I mean, guys, there is a movie. I mean, if I'm going to show another scene here, where if you look, there's actually a movie version of. Oh, it's probably. I apologize for this. I'm going to find it. Um, there was a movie version, almost image. It's in this image right here. I apologize to the people on the podcast, but it's an image of Luke Skywalker. It looks identical to Mark Hamill. It's almost surreal how the art is demonstrably better than how Luke Skywalker is drawn in the first issue in parts. The improvement of the art really is dramatic if you read this from the first issue to the sixth issue, and it just goes to show you that even a comic book publishing company as powerful as Marvel can be surprised by the reaction, and you never know what's going to hit. They had no idea that Star Wars would not only be a successful comic, but it would save their company and harken in a brand new era of pop culture fantasy.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, it's I would say it's defined a generation, but it's defined like 3 or 4 generations. I mean, the impact of Star Wars is so apparent, and it's interesting because you have this sort of conversation about when somebody tells a fantasy story about how much they can ask you to suspend their disbelief. Well, all of the things that we're now just sort of conditioned to suspending when we watch fiction, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, or something in between, we've been conditioned by Star Wars. It's so impactful that there are things like traveling at light speed that we don't think a second about because Star Wars made it feel so legitimate. You know what I mean? Like the mastery of Star Wars is that you take it, like George Lucas, and this is less comic book related, but George Lucas took all of these different things from various mythologies and fantasies that we've already been conditioned throughout history to be okay with and mashed them together. And so the only thing at the time he really asked us to suspend was that notion of light travel speed. And he's so influential now that the teleportation or traveling at light speed is in almost every cosmic sci-fi film story or whatever that you see nowadays. And it's absolutely nuts. And also, as we were kind of like talking about more artists of the age, I might take back my Jim Aparo and forward Bernie Wrightson. I think Bernie Wrightson would have done a phenomenal Star Wars. Just the texture that he would have brought to space, to the
detail.
characters. Yeah, the detail. I mean, he was a master of composition, and I think that the space that Star Wars provides is unparalleled in the opportunity for an artist who performs so well at those qualities. But just as a closing statement, it was great to expose myself to this early stuff because I don't think I would have done it without the podcast. So, cheers, and I hope that in many ways somebody listens to this and gets exposed to it in the same way I did, because I mean, one of the things we kind of flaunt is that the three of us are sort of three generations of comic book readers. And so, this is the type of stuff that's going to bring new experiences to people of various generations that they might not have otherwise had. So, cheers, Bill. This was a great experience.
Here, here.
So that's going to wrap this one up, guys. We will all talk to you later, and we'll see you in the funny pages. Professor Bill, Comic Boom, and Dark Knight Nation. We're out.